Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Full-Time Whittle podcast, bringing you all the news after the full-time whistle blows. In this episode, I will be joined by one of the country's leading journalists, Alan Nixon. Alan has been intensively covering the administration at Wigan Athletic, and today we will hear his insights into the events that have happened at the JMX Stadium. Unfortunately, in the podcast, we've had a few technical difficulties with the audio for a couple of minutes around the 15-minute mark, but you can still make out what was said. I really do apologise for this, but without further ado, this is the Full-Time Whittle podcast with Alan Nixon. First and foremost, Alan, for people who are aware of your work, can you give a brief description of who you are and what you do?
I'm a football writer. I've been around for a few decades, currently working with The Sun. It's funny, before I did this, I was thinking, when did I first start covering Wigan? And it was the day Larry Lloyd got them promoted in the old 4th Division at Springfield Park. So that might just date me without carbon dating me. That might just tell you how long I've been about.
So throughout this process, you've been at the forefront of the coverage leading Wigan Athletic's administration. What has been your opinion of the situation from start to finish?
Just horrendous. It really does. It gets into you. You know, you don't want to leave it alone because it's too big a story. You know, I still remember the shock when we found out it was going to be administration in July the 1st. You know, it's funny, things like that stick in your mind, that almost hour by hour how that one developed. And I remember at the time thinking, you know, apart from the fact you think, how's this happened? You immediately think, well, how do you get out of this? You know, I always think you try and find a solution to something apart from just going over old ground and why it happened and some of the basically wild ideas about why it happened in the first place. And from day one, I thought, well, you've got to find a way through this and a way through, because I'd seen what happened at Bolton just a year ago. You've got to find a way through that doesn't completely cripple your club, not just the once, but for a great deal of time in the future. So my focus straight away was, what are these administrators going to do? What are they going to leave you with? And how are you going to find a buyer? Now, a lot of people said at the time, oh, why don't you concentrate on the betting story and all the rest of it? The betting story never added up to me. The only thing that mattered to me and all the way through was find an owner. That is the priority in these matters. You've got to find an owner and you've got to do it fast. Otherwise, the damage gets worse by the day. And I hate to say it, but that's the way it's worked out since.
Going back to the very start of the administration and the circumstances around it, are you able to give your opinion and reflect on that? Because I know it was very bizarre from the outside looking in, and I wonder if you have the same opinion.
Well, what happened, I think we've got to probably wind it back a little bit to why it came to this. Stanley Choi, round about last November, decided that his great idea to spend 20 million or so to get promotion wasn't going to work. So he was looking for help. He was looking for somebody to prop him up round about November. And that's when maybe one or two started thinking, that's a bit strange, isn't it? Has he run out of money already? Then you come to January and they could have sold Anthony Robinson, and that would probably have tidied the club over until the summer. And we never have had this. Well, certainly not during the season. So the Robinson thing falls down and you think, that's a bit of a financial blow. How are you going to find this money down the line? You do not expect suddenly for the club to just say, right, that's it, there's no more money. I mean, there was no indication of this. There wasn't really a hint that this was going to happen. And in football, we all like to think, oh, no, the worst isn't going to happen. But the worst did happen, and it happened spectacularly. And the way it happened was just astonishing. And they duped the Football League. I know people say it should be a better fit and proper person's test. Yes, but if you break an agreement that they had, and Stanley Choi had put money in for 2 years, remember, there was no reason for the Football League to question him. And he brought in this young guy as, at the time, a 50-50 partner. And then suddenly he's in charge of virtually the whole thing. That's when you smell a rat. But they did that in such a way that nobody was aware of it. I think one or two fans were a little bit concerned, and to be fair, they did brilliantly to spot that as early. But at the time, I certainly don't think it was general knowledge that they'd done this move, and nobody thought that would eventually lead to them pulling the plug. And when they do, the administrators come in and they've got a terrible job on their hands. I mean, you're doing it in the middle of a season. Well, not in the middle of a season. You're just back from project restart, all the rest of it. You still had a chance of staying up, and that would have been a major help. So when they come in, there's so many factors involved. It's frightening. It's absolutely frightening. They've got to raise money. They've got to find somebody to buy it, not knowing what they're buying. Are they buying a championship club or a League One club? So they went into a very chaotic scene. So I don't fault them for what happened in the first few weeks. But it's really since then that I've not been overjoyed with the process.
It's safe to say that you've had a lot of conversations and interactions with the Wigan Athletic administrators at Begbie's trainer. What have you made of your conversations?
At the start, I thought Krasner was very open. It was pretty obvious it was going to be the Gerald Krasner show. I mean, he was everywhere, wasn't he? And telling us all about the great administrations that he'd pulled off in the past. Okay, that's not really maybe what you want to hear. Now, at the time, I thought, well, okay, I'll see if we can bounce a few things off this guy and see what's going on. And I did. I was sending him texts on quite a regular basis. Then he stopped answering and saying no comment. And I thought, well, that's not very helpful. But by that stage, I'd actually got lines into 4 different groups who'd been trying to buy the club. Very quickly, by chance and through people I know in the game, I found out who some of the potential bidders were. And I spoke to them off the record clearly, and we discussed it. You know, what do you think? I've got to say, every person I spoke to, I said, look, this is a club worth buying right now. This is a steal, I thought. And then they start looking at the books and all the rest of it, and they say, well, wait a minute, have you seen the size of the payroll? The payroll was just ridiculous. I mean, clearly the previous regime, and I have to include the domestic board, were living the dream. They were spending so much money on good players. I mean, that was a good side, good players and big wages. But the trouble is that when that money stops, anybody coming in has got to then pick up those wages, and you couldn't do it. There's an impossibility. Everybody who looked at it initially ran away because the payroll was too high. And then they had to sell players. And I did the story about how they were going to have to sell a lot of players, which is denied foolishly. Of course they were going to have to sell players. They had to get the wages down. They had to get money in to keep the club going. The first thing they did was sell the young players, and then they moved on to the ones they couldn't avoid selling because they got relegation clauses or whatever. Again, that's probably the fault of the previous regime for having a relegation clause in Anthony Robinson's deal and Kieran Dowell. In fairness, that was the only way you would get those players. That calibre of player coming to Wigan would say, well, look, if the worst happened, we don't think it will, if the worst happened, will you sell us for the same price? And obviously the owners don't even consider the possibility of relegation. They're looking at promotion. And they say, yeah, okay. But those contract agreements were on the previous regime. So yet again, the administrators had to do the best of a bad job, and they got rid of Robinson. Obviously Dowell goes back to Everton. But for me, the real crunch, the real tipping point was when we got to the stage of Kipri and Jamal Lowe. And by that stage, we had the latest, and I thought, I've got to say, I'm not an expert. I thought the most viable people at the time left was this French-American group, as I call them, of Gautier Gani and the 2 American chaps who'd come on the scene. And when they came in, I thought, oh, at last, you've got money and football knowledge. I thought, well, this is a runner. This could be the one that actually gets you out of the brown stuff. And then the fun starts.
Are you able to disclose any of your conversations with the French-American party? Because I know you've covered them quite in depth since they came onto the scene.
Well, what happened at first was that a contact, I better not name him, a contact told me, look, a guy called Gautier Gani has been over to meet them. I said, what? The Barnsley guy? I said, yeah, he's now working in Ostend. I said, all right, okay. I said, who's he going to be representing? Immediately I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's the Barnsley people, the Chinese people at Barnsley. And I thought, oh, what story that's going to be. So I had to just write this. I confirmed that Gani had been there. I confirmed he'd met Paul Stanley and the rest of them and had been treated very seriously. And it was actually described to me by someone in authority that he was a credible bidder. So I thought, well, this is marvellous. So I tried to get in touch with Gani. I pestered him, emails, he wouldn't answer me. In fact, he didn't answer me, so I can't speak to you. For about a week, I kept pestering him. I did stories, it was him, and he'd been over, but that was all I had. And then eventually, he got back to me and he said, look, you clearly given us a fair crack. You've mentioned me, you've not dropped me in it. Yes, we are interested. And I said, well, is it the Barnsley people? Where's the money coming from? And he said, it's these two guys, Frankel and Kelt. These are the two guys, they want to buy the club. And I said, well, what's your vision for the club? And he said, well, we want to turn it around. We want to ideally get it back as soon as possible. We know it's going to be a hard job, but we're willing to do it. And again, I'll say quite openly, he said, well, what do you think the price is? I said, well, look, from my knowledge, it's this, and this. You've got to pay the creditors, because foreign people, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, foreign people and American people do not understand the concept of administration too well. They do it differently in their countries. Over here, we do it a certain way. And if it's a football league club, you've got to pay the bills, or you get penalties for it. You get further penalties for it. So they were aware of all of that. Now, I don't think the first offer was ridiculous. In fact, it was about, they wouldn't give me a precise figure, but they told me it was between 5 and 6. Now, that was at a time when you still had Exton, which was still part of the package, and you still had what we loosely called the chippy. You've got the football club, you've got the training ground, the other training ground, and that's it. And that was the offer. Now, I knew from previous offers, which had been very close to being accepted, that between 5 and 6 wasn't far off. So I did the story. Now, one of the administrators seemed to think I described them as being credible bidders in the piece I wrote, and took exception to this use of the word credible. And I thought, well, wait a minute, you've got a potential buyer here. Why are you not being more cooperative with them? And to this day, I still don't understand. They say, oh, they were asking us, you know, we were to do this, that, and the other for them, and all the rest of it. And I thought, okay, you know, maybe they aren't all they appear. So we did this. I did the story. Krasner then jumps down the throat of the story, saying, oh, no, they aren't real bidders, they've broken NDAs and all the rest of it. Well, again, I thought that was a bit petty. You've actually got a potential buyer, and you don't want to deal with them for whatever reason. Now, you remember that soon after that, Krasner then came out with this business about didn't really want a foreign owner. He wanted a domestic owner, if possible. Now, he said that in front of fans. He said that in front of me. And I thought, that's a strange kind of thing to say. You know, there are ways of negotiating things, but saying that you'd prefer a British owner when you've got an American stroke French bidder, and you've also, by your own admission, had several other foreign bidders, I thought, well, why are you being so exclusive here? So as the longer it gets, the more I'm thinking, what are you doing here, Mr. Krasner?
It's very interesting, and thanks for that answer. What do you think of the current buyer situation at Wigan Athletic?
I wish there was one. You've obviously got Norman Smurthwaite, who was very badly received on social media when it came out that he was interested, and was apparently getting on quite well with Krasner at the time. Krasner blamed him for his name being in the public domain. I don't know. I don't even know who put Smurthwaite's name in the public domain, but you know, people are concerned. People will find out. Somebody did it. I don't know who. I found it was right, so I confirmed it. Yeah, it was right. He's a potential bidder. But that didn't go down very well. But Smurthwaite's not going away. Now, it turns out at the very end, the final sort of chapters a week or so ago, that the French-American bid was 2 million, and Krasner had offered, Smurthwaite had offered 3 million, half of which was upfront. Now, upfront doesn't matter right now. It's got to be hard cash. So by my amateur calculations, I think the French-American bid, which was low at 2 million, is still higher than Smurthwaite's. So as it stands, we've got Smurthwaite, who's going to have to maybe get into bed with somebody else and do a deal with somebody to get the money up to pay the bills, is probably favourite, unless somebody's mystery foreign groups actually stop talking and start acting. I mean, I did the story about the group called M-Buzz, who had a little bit of a link with Wigan in the past, who were very interested in doing it. I spoke to somebody involved with it, and it was all buzzers and bells about a week or two ago. Yeah, we're going to make an offer. Yeah. Okay, well, as far as I'm aware, the offer's not come in. Now, there's been Bahrainis mentioned. I don't know who they are, but I'm a little suspicious because a year ago, Bahrainis were mentioned at Bolton. 6 years ago, Bahrainis were mentioned at Blackburn Rovers, and we're still waiting for Bahrainis. So that makes me suspicious. So right now, if you were asking me if I was a betting man, which you might know that I am, I would say that Smurthwaite is in quite a strong position if he gets allies, and that might yet be another part of concern for me.
Thanks very much for your answer. And I'd like to apologise for the feedback coming from the podcast. So first and foremost, my next question would be, with the Wigan Athletic Supporters Club and their fundraising efforts, do they now have a position of where they can have a bit of a bargaining power with any of these said parties?
Well, had they got the club, and they would have been involving the fans on a basis of, well, if you put your money in, we'll give you, I think it was 10% of the club going forward. That money would have been used as cash for the next 2 years. If that's where the fans wanted the money to go, that's where the money would have gone, and they get something back for it. I do not like the idea of fans buying a football club initially, because you couldn't really ask. A good owner does not need money from fans to buy a football club. A good owner should have that money themselves. If they then want to involve fans, fair enough, that's their choice. But ultimately, the owner has to be the owner, and the owner has to put their own money in. So right now you've got this cash which was miraculously raised from all over the place, and we're not quite sure how that's going to be used. You know, I don't know where that goes just now. I don't know if they're talking to other parties they believe in, or they can have some influence over. If they can do that, it would be ideal. But as I say, I don't think that money being used on entry to the deal is a good idea. But as part of it down the line, yeah, okay, it's not a bad thing. And it's something that might well happen just now. A lot of clubs going forward, where fans are probably going to have to keep clubs going in the current climate. So yes, that's okay. That's a good idea.
Thank you. And I think my next question is more general in terms of the administration itself, but you've been very good with your coverage in terms of leading in the mainstream media. Do you believe that other media outlets should have maybe covered it a lot more rather than the average Jadon Sancho transfer, Gareth Bale transfer? I mean, there was even tracking his flight ahead of his move to Spurs, whereas Mansfield Town, Wigan Athletic, Charlton have had little coverage when you consider that.
There's a great deal to that. That's probably just the way the media is these days. It's all Premier League based. Not all, the majority is. It's all about showbiz. And unfortunately, you don't have the number of reporters about that you had when I started, when there were loads and it was almost a man a club. Now you maybe have 6 or 7 clubs that you're going to try and cover on a kind of daily basis just for your checks. I've got to say, you've really got to bully your own office into covering some of these stories. You've got to say, look, this is important. I know it's a League One club. Now, they might not be very well supported clubs. They might not necessarily make your sales figures soar, but they're still vital stories to cover. And the Wigan story is just quite extraordinary. I mean, it's a level up. And when you think about it, if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, this is a club that won the FA Cup and are now in the position they're in a short space of time. It's an extraordinary set of events. But I don't blame other media outlets for not chasing it, because I've got to tell you, you would have to spend an awful lot of time on it. there was a time there during the height of this, every second call of mine was on this subject, because it's so vast. You're trying to track down Stanley Choi, you're trying to find out how young was it even a Stanley Choi? Sorry, an how young. And then you get into the stage of, there's a player moving every day. Where's he going? Who's after him? What are they getting for him? What's the clause in his contract? What's the wages? Did he take a pay cut? You spend so much time getting these small details that, it is almost a full-time job, and there are not terribly many newspapers just now who employ enough reporters to cover that. That is just the sad state of the newspaper industry. So yeah, I know what you're saying about the Sky coverage and the triviality that we get of an hour-long transfer window show of absolute garbage from people that have never broken a story in their lives, when there are serious stories out there. But serious stories take time to put together, and they might not be, certainly in terms of television, they might not be easy to put together, because you can't get to the people you want to get to, and it's numbers and all the rest of it. So it's not an easy projection of a story. Yeah, newspapers have touched on it. I hope my papers that I've written for have given it more coverage than any. But you would hope that other papers will look at it and say, look, there's got to be a story here, and get on top of it. I mean, a lot of the information is out there. That's what gets me at times. When the administrators did the report into the state of the club, that was actually out there. And none of the national papers went near it until I did it on a Sunday. And the thing that stood out to me that day was administration costs, potentially 1.3 million. Lawyers' costs, possibly 1 million. And you wonder, why has this not been solved? Well, there's your answer. That's obscene. And I tell you what now, and you can certainly use this, and I'll no doubt get blasted for it. The only way this club gets sold is if the administrators' costs are reduced. They will not get a buyer at that full cost, at 1.3 and at 1. That is too much money. Everybody else is taking a haircut here. Players took pay cuts because of relegation, forced on them, so they had to go. Managers left their jobs because of this. Everybody has suffered pain. So the administrators and the lawyers, I think, need to suffer a little bit of pain here too. Financial pain, they're still going to get a lot, but they need to take less for this deal to happen. Otherwise, I'm a bit fearful of what might happen down the line. They have got to take less, find a way of doing it. Stop all of this nonsense that we're hearing just now about how the money's here, the money's there, the money's everywhere. Look, let's give our heads a shake here. What's holding us up now is the cost of taking over a football club, and the bulk of those costs are the admin and the legal charges.
Thank you so much for that answer. And earlier this week, the administrators released quite a telling club statement. Are you allowed to weigh in on your thoughts about that? There's just smiling straight away, so I'm sure you'll have something interesting to say.
It was, it's Fantasy Island. Krasner says that because I wrote the story about the French-American final offer of £2 million, that this scared off one of his many, many mystery buyers. Now, let's have it right. He says, I didn't check my story. I didn't pick the phone up to him. I knew the story was correct. And the story was correct. By the end of the week, that offer was made. And during that week, the French-American group had been in contact with the administrators, with Krasner's own team, to get every single last detail of what had to be paid. And their interpretation of all that was $2 million, that's their final offer. Now, that might strike you as being low. It possibly is. Well, it obviously is. It didn't get the deal done. But for him to pretend that this didn't exist and to use it as an excuse for some fantasy offer of £4 million is laughable. Unfortunately, the fans have seen through that, judging by some of their remarks. And I'm glad of that. If nothing else, it tells you Wigan fans are not stupid. So that's great. The fact is, I've known some of these bidders without publicising them, and I've known some of the moves. And one of the people that he's been talking to on and off for weeks, I've known as a total and utter fantasist. Now, I knew that after talking to him for 10 minutes, And yet Krasner's been on to him for weeks, months, and still taking him seriously, or using him and his so-called interest to keep the price of the club high. Now, I don't know which it is. I'm sure they won't admit which it is. But when I know this guy's one of the bidders, I'm going, he's never getting a club. He couldn't raise £4, never mind 4 million.
I know no one knows for sure, but do you think Wigan Athletic will have a successful outcome from this?
Only if the price of the deal comes down, I think. The only way I can see right now that you can get to the three and a bit that they're looking for, if we can, there isn't really a set figure. It does go up and down, mainly because the bill does increase by the day because you've got tax bills ongoing. So let's say it's about 3.3 million at the moment. Call me a liar for 500,000 maybe down the line here. Let's say it's 3.3. The only way any of the people around just now are going to get to 3.3 is to combine. Now remember, the French Americans did consider combining with Lonergan at one stage, and maybe Smurthwaite will go in with Lonergan or go in with somebody else and get that total up to what has been looked for. If that's the case, then the deal can happen. But my overall view is that the deal will be difficult to do unless people take less, unless the administrators and the lawyers take less. Now you're going to say, well, would you take less? Well, the fact is, yeah, I have actually taken less since all this started. So I can actually stand up to that particular argument as well. But if you want this to actually continue and for there to be a deal, I would suggest, and you've got Lisa and Andy on side and you've got the mayor on side, I think they should jump on this bandwagon and say, look, take less money, please, would you? Don't have this in your conscience that your costs are going to stop a deal. And if that happens, I would have a lot more hope that there'll be a deal. If it doesn't happen, it's going to be a stretch.
Thank you so much for your answer, and thank you so much for your time today. I know you're extremely busy, and it's really appreciated that you come on and speak about all things Wigan Athletic and what's happened. I think the final thing I have to say is, for all time's sake, for Twitter's sake, any news, Al, is a phrase you're quite accustomed to.
At the moment, in terms of transfers, I wish there was transfers. Having said that, there was the John Sheridan news, which kept us occupied, and previously Simon Grayson the day before. It's remarkable. It's been a mad transfer window for football, but the only place you could say, I think, throughout the summer where you could guarantee there would be movement, and sadly outwards, was Wigan Athletic. And to see that team dismantled, to have been one of the very few people with the privilege of actually being to the games at the end of the season, and to see that team dismantled, it's a bit hard to take.
I personally thought with a few additions in the summer, or in the window, I feel like that team could have challenged the playoffs and beyond.
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, if you look at it now, I mean, this actually probably makes it worse. If you look at it now, that would have been a top 6 contender, no doubt about it. If you've been brutally hard here, you would say that for the money that Choi spent, and let's be fair, it was actually good money. For the money he spent putting a team together, that was a team, even last season, that was worthy of the top 6. Because at the first half of the season, they kept throwing points away and losing late goals. And the difference between that and the final result was such that instead of being in the top 6, they were in the bottom 6. It was that drastic. People at the club kept saying that to me. Oh, if the game lasted 80 minutes, we'd be in the top 6. I would make a rather blunt reply to that. But it is the truth. If they've been able to hold on to points in the first half of the season, added to what they did in the second half of the season, Stanley Choi might be a Premier League owner right now. That's how mad this all is. That's how crazy this all is. And that is, I suppose, if you are able to take a real step back, that is the gamble that foreign owners take. They think they can put money in. They were obviously sold a dream. You give us £20 million, we'll put a promotion team together for you, because that's where the big payoff is. And he probably thought, right, okay, we'll do that. We'll have a go. And they could have done it if they'd actually started the season properly. They could have done it. But the trouble is that when they don't do it, the gambler's instinct in this case wasn't just, let's twist. It was let's fold. And that It's shocking.
It's been really tough to take, and from that Fulham game in, I believe it was July, only one player from the starting lineup remains, and that's Cal Naismith. And there's a few players that was on the bench: Jamie Jones, Lee Evans, Joe Garner. I know Gavin Massey's returning to full fitness at the weekend against Portsmouth. So I think it just shows that the upheaval, but it is a necessary evil of administration, because that's the only way you can reduce costs. And I think with the coronavirus pandemic too, there's no income coming in from match day revenue in terms of fans coming to games, people buying the pies and the pints. And I feel like that, does it make it more difficult to sell a football club with a pandemic? Because we've never seen this before.
Undoubtedly, because you've basically, if you're going to take the club just now, you're going to have to fund it for the foreseeable future. You're not just buying it. You need running costs for probably the season. The TV money is not good. It's a fraction, in fact, an eighth of what you were used to in the Championship. I mean, that is a massive, massive difference between those two levels. So frankly, anybody going in right now is going to be running it with their money, and the money they've spent to buy it is one thing. The money they're going to have to find to run it for the season and for the foreseeable future is another. I do not think it's too likely this particular squad is going to get promoted. Therefore, you're probably saying that next season, if they stay up and they're still in League One, you're still going to have to bankroll it. You're going to have to spend all that money again because you're not going to have TV money. It's a completely different world. It's not a world that you thought you'd ever be back in, but it's a totally different world. I mean, the last time you were in League One, Wigan were a money team. Wigan had Dave Whelan. Wigan bought promotion. And that's not a slur, that's a fact. Now, it's a completely different world. You're down there with Rochdale and with Accrington Stanley, and they're used to it. They know how to budget for these things. They know how to find these players. Right now, you're finding the players, but somebody you know, let's phone it. Oh, he's available. Let's bring him in. That's again where I go back to that tipping point for me, with the situation where you had Lowe and Kipre sold. Up until that point, and the French fellas stressed that to me at the time, if we keep those two players, we can go back up. Now, they must have budgeted for that to go back up. And they had an agreement, and this is something I should have mentioned earlier, I'm sorry, I should have said this at the time. They had an agreement, they thought, at a particular number, as long as Kipre and Lowe were not sold. Now, I was at the press conference when Lowe was sold, and I actually sent a text to Gauti Igani and I said, Lowe's gone and Kipre's going to fall. They were astonished, absolutely astonished. They thought they had a deal at that time and they would keep those players. And when those two went, to me, I just thought, we're on the downhill now, and there's no particular sign of it stopping. In terms of football, I'm thinking, you've missed a chance. That was the time to do it, was when you still had those players, and they didn't do it. And that rankles with me quite a bit. And I think when all of this is finished, I think we will all probably come around to the thought that that was the time when it could have been saved and kept intact. It can still be saved. It's not going to be intact, is it? You're going to be left with a massive rebuilding job. Now, the fact is, a week ago, even now, a week, 10 days ago, whatever, they were still willing to take it on and try to turn it around, but they knew it was a massive rebuilding project. And as a rebuilding project, that would require some money down the line as well. So I am quite sorry that you've missed out on these bidders. I think they might have been proper people. I could be completely wrong. I could be fooled. You don't know what an owner's like until he's in. But they did strike me, amongst all the other people that I've spoken to in this process, who had ideas, good, bad, and indifferent. I thought this lot had a little bit of something about them. But as I say, in the minute Kipre and Lowe went, and then the fact the price of the club isn't adjusted after you've sold £2 million worth of talent, you try and explain that to MD. I can't. I don't get that. How can you have a price for something and then you sell two players worth 2 million and the price is still the same? That's smoke and mirrors.
Thanks so much for that insight, and you are very right with that, because it's almost like a comparison, small scale. If you go to Asda, you do your full shop, your main items, your milk and your meat are taken out, and it's still the same price with the meat and the milk. Bad example, but the
No, no.
fear is there.
No, well, I look at it like you're going to buy a car and you come to take it at the end of it and you find out the alloys are off. Oh no, you're just getting ordinary wheels. Or, that nice stereo system. No, well, actually, that's not with the car. Sorry. What gave you that idea? And you lose two players. Like, yeah, Keeper's gone to the Premier League. You've lost a real player. Now, you could have bought the club and he might have kicked off. He might have said, I don't want to play, all the rest of it. But then if you're owning the club rather than running an administration, you can then say, well, you're only going to go when we want you to go. We'll sell you for good money. We'll try and get a little auction going here, rather than, here's somebody with £1 million. Let's take that, right? And that's it. That's it. He's gone. So yeah, that was that to me. If I went from optimism to slightly less than optimism on the few days when Kipri and Lowe went. I thought, this is going to be hard now, and I'm afraid that's the way it's been.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for your time today, Alan. Is there any way people can follow you on Twitter or follow your coverage?
Well, I'm old school. I still like the papers, but it's certainly on Twitter at Reluctant Nico. And if you have been banned by me, all I can say is you probably deserved it.
What a great way to end, and that is basically your catchphrase on Twitter. If you're a FUD, you get blocked. If you aren't, you last another day.
You get to stay. I have blocked a few people, but there's also about 90,000 that have hung about. So there must be some entertainment there.
Absolutely. So, but thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it so much, and you've been excellent. And keep up the coverage, because I know a lot of fans have. I wouldn't say enjoy is probably the wrong word, but it's definitely helped keep them informed.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. And yourself, by the way, I had a great interview with the mayor. I suppose this was the after the Lord Mayor show.
Thank you very much. And hopefully we can see a positive resolution soon. But thanks so much for your time. And I'd like to say thank you for everyone for watching. If you're new to the podcast, please feel free to like and subscribe. And I'll see you guys for the next one. Thanks so much for watching. And thanks for Alan Nixon, for his participation.